Good morning and welcome to Wholesale Change, where we provide thought leadership for wholesale change agents in the distribution industry just like you. Because if you're on this call, you probably are a wholesale change agent. We've got an absolutely fascinating topic today and distinguished guest, Jonathan Byrnes, who will be talking about how to take back control of your profitability. But before we get to Jonathan and all of that good stuff, we want to first thank our sponsor, Epicor, for making this content possible to you. As it pertains to Epicor, are you finally ready to integrate all your business functions with an enterprise resource planning system? Or maybe you're struggling with legacy computer systems that just aren't cutting it anymore. Your IT costs seem never ending, your servers are at the end of their lifespan, your systems don't talk to each other, and you can't get decent reporting to make informed decisions. Does that sound like you? At Epicor, they get you and your unique distribution challenges. Epicor has been around for 50 years. Their ERP solutions were designed with distributors for distributors like you. Epicor for distribution goes beyond standard ERPs to provide innovative, highly focused solutions that are made for and essential to your business. Learn more about how Epicor has helped thousands of wholesalers succeed by visiting epicor.com/distribution. And without further ado, I would like to welcome our special guest, Dr. Jonathan Byrnes. Jonathan, welcome.
Thank you.
So we've got a little background here on you, and I think maybe for the benefit of our audience, take us through the story of your career and how you've gotten to where you are and what you focus on.
Thank you. It's a very interesting, broad question. It's been kind of long and varied. I've done a variety of things. I went to Columbia for my MBA, did quite well there, and wound up turning down the traditional Wall Street offers, and went to Harvard for a doctorate. I have a DBA in both supply chain management and strategy. Mike Porter was on my thesis committee. And I also have an all but dissertation in economics from what we call across the river in arts and sciences. I've done primarily consulting for most of my career. And I've done a variety of things that are kind of cornerstone innovations in supply chain management. I developed the first vendor managed inventory system in the early 1980s, inventory echeloning, flow through or pipeline inventory systems, cross-docking and things like that in a series of projects that I did in the hospital supply industry. I also was very active in telecommunications in the breakup of AT&T. I was one of the lead witnesses and worked with a number of the spin-off regional bells. And as part of that, when I was doing the supply chain work, I noticed that when I tried to dig into either a telephone company or hospital supply company and understand why they were profitable as opposed to whether they were profitable, I couldn't really get past the P&L. And I found it really puzzling. I knew that the company I was working with at the time, Baxter, the big healthcare company, now it's Cardinal, was profitable, but I couldn't figure out where and why. And I think that as an academic, that really puzzled me. I find if I can't really understand something deeply, I'm not really comfortable. So I thought about it, and it seemed to me that the issue was that in traditional accounting, revenues are kind of piled up all together and costs are piled up all together. And then you subtract one for the other and hopefully it's black and not red. That's kind of the way it works.
But by the way, I presume that for Cardinal, it was pretty close to the edge there.
Well, in those days, they were making a good amount of money. They were actually selling, commodity-like products, so it was pretty close to the edge. But they had a tremendous credibility and reach. The issue, when I thought about it, I thought about my accounting course in Columbia, which I actually enjoyed a lot. And I learned that there were two types of accounting. One is financial reporting, and jumbling up all the revenues together was fine for that. And then there's management control. And I found that what I had learned was variance analysis, which didn't really get me very far. So it seemed to me that when I looked at what was going on, particularly in vendor managed inventory, where I was very, very deep in developing the first systems, there were a variety of relationships that companies could form with their customers, from dropping things at the dock occasionally to dropping them steadily to unit of measure, and then up on into the clinic or clinical area or the patient care area. And all of those had different costs and also different revenues. So this sort of uniform cost and uniform revenue paradigm that came from the old mass market era was breaking down. And so I developed a way to actually go into each transaction. I go into Staples, I buy 2 pencils, an eraser, and a ruler. That's 3 transactions. And I figured out a way to do a P&L on every single transaction, and not activity-based costing, peanut butter spread across the whole thing, but actually hooking into the general ledger. Now we have a very sophisticated SaaS, we call it enterprise profit management company called Profit Isle, where we actually hook into a general ledger, and we can change the costing literally every hour if we want, because we have the costs pouring into the systems. So in those days, working with the PC AT computer, I had just upgraded from the PC XT, I think. Some of your grandparents will remember what that was. Working in Q&A and access and so on and so forth. We used to have to do runs overnight. We actually did a run on one of Baxter's divisions, and the hospital supply division. What we found was astonishing. And I've seen this pattern in literally every company that we've worked with. We've worked with well over $100 billion in client revenues at this point, probably edging up to 200 or 300 billion. And what we always see are basically 3 categories of profitability, profit segments, whether it's customers or products, stores, sales reps, whatever it is, all the suppliers. Basically, about 15 to 20% of the customers, let's say, or products, give them 150 to 200% of the profits.
Right.
And we call those profit peaks. And about 15 to 20% of the customers, or whatever it is, stores, products, take away half of that. We call those the profit drains. And then the rest, the other 50%, and I know that 20 and 20 is 40, 100 minus 40 is 60. So 60%, if you will, Jonathan's smiling, of the remaining customers basically are what we call profit deserts. They probably look like Monument Valley that you saw in the opening slide. Was that Monument Valley, Jonathan?
I'm not sure where that was.
Yeah, I think that's an old John Wayne movies, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
Up here in New England, we would say that they live where the barnacles do, right at the water line, not doing much of anything.
Right.
But what's really important is that they're consuming half the resources. So when you step back, it turns out that from, say, a supply chain or sales perspective, you've got 50 plus, say, 20, 70% of the customers or products are consuming about 70% of the resources and producing nothing. So that was an incredible aha. We've replicated that, and we now, as I said, have, we're able to run in some clients. We can run 4 or 5 million transactions a quarter. So we can run at enormous scale and very quickly, and all the usual things that people do, use machine learning and other sorts of ways to conceptualize things. But the bottom line is that when I sort of stepped back again and said, what's going on here? When I wrote my first book, Islands of Profit, based on a set of monthly columns that I wrote for Harvard Business School in Working Knowledge, it seemed to me that that our economy's gone through basically three eras that are very different. Back before 1900, I should say, in the 1800s, everything was local. And then round about, say, 1900, more or less, we got roads and we got transcontinental railroads. That's a big more or less. You know, we had mass communications, and that was the era of mass markets. My old friend, Richard Tedlow over at Harvard Business School, who's a business historian and famously says that the best job in the world is being a business historian because you get to predict the past. You know, so he wrote a book called Mass Markets in America, where he looked at the transition from local to mass markets. In the era of mass markets, which extended through most of the 1900s, and certainly when I went to school, I was deep in the middle of it. Basically, to succeed, you only had to do one thing, and one thing well, and that is you had to be big. Because there are economies of scale, that means that the more units you sell, the lower the cost of each unit. Pretty simple. So the win strategy was to get all the revenues you could from everywhere and make sure that your costs were low. And that created the basic paradigm that people use in business today. You jumble up the revenues. If they're bigger, it's good. And if the costs, you jumble them up. And if that's bigger, it's bad. That's kind of the way that it works. And to this day, that's the way.
So one of the fallacies of that thinking is more market share is inherently good, right?
More market share of your profit peaks is wonderful.
Well, I understand.
More market share of your profit drains is terrible.
That's right.
So you have to really kind of see it. So this began to break up around, call it the year 2000, more or less. You know, it's a big more or less. And I know Jonathan and I were kind of in the thick of things, you know, at that time, as well as up through today. Mm-hmm. And what happened with the internet, and Amazon really was the sort of the forerunner of this trend. And a lot of Amazon came from MIT and still does. The number 2 guy, Jeff Wilkie, was a former student of mine. And a lot of the original math and, you know, the way that they approach things, you know, came out of the courses that I and my colleagues, Steve Graves, Don Rosenfield, and a few others were teaching. And so basically, Amazon was an inventory play. You know, they looked at books, which went obsolete pretty quickly, and it was pretty hard to predict what was going to be hot. And your local bookstore couldn't really carry much inventory. So it was really hit or miss. They were doing a lot of write-downs. And they thought, well, gee, why don't we centralize the inventory? And with this new thing called the internet, maybe we can use it for marketing. And so they went out, you know, and created what's Amazon. But it was very interesting because if you think about those three profit segments in most companies, the peaks, which are large, high profit customers, the drains, which are large, losing customers, and the deserts, which do nothing, but a lot of them, and they're small. Amazon goes after the deserts. And they have made a science out of going after the deserts. If you want to do vendor managed inventory, you do not call Amazon. If you want to have any kind of technical integration, you do not call Amazon. If I want to buy 3 books, pencil and eraser and a ruler, I go on Amazon. And frankly, for most of them, I don't care if it takes 1, 2, 3, or 4 days. So they can create a very powerful inventory echeloning system. You could spend a lot of time on how Amazon works. But what that did essentially is that it began to break up these unitary mass markets. I know this sounds kind of like technical talk, but I'll bring it down to earth in a second. And you began to have Amazon and other internet players coming in at the low end and eating up these profit desert revenues, and companies who thought that all revenues were good panicked and they tried to fight them. And then they kept losing money because Amazon is a super specialist in what they do. You know, you can't beat Amazon at their own game. That's period. But that leaves the whole higher end of the market as an open playing field. So companies that were smart began to move up market. I know that MSC, Eric Gershwin, was here. I think it was last week you mentioned, Jonathan,
yes.
Right?
Yes, he said.
Yeah, MSC has a tagline, built to make you better. not built to make your stuff cheaper.
Right.
Built to make you better. And they've got technical teams and all sorts of things that are in the public domain that, you know, people know about and things that they don't know about. So the companies had to move up market. So you wound up with this separation. And what that meant is that a company had to figure out where it was going to play it, whether it was going to play higher service in the profit peak customers or play, you know, low cost with the deserts, which is what Amazon does. Good luck competing with Amazon. What's interesting about the profit drains when we really dug into them with a bunch of our clients is that almost all of these really big money losing customers are losing money not because the pricing's bad. Repeat that, not because they have under market pricing. It's because their operations are too costly. And they're things that are never measured, things like the order frequency. So I know one company, a distributor, put vending machines in all their customers, you know, and sales went up and gross margin went up and everybody celebrated. And when we took a look at the actual net profit, it turned out that they were losing a fortune. Why? Because the salespeople were selling the vending machines by telling people, hey, you don't have to have any inventory. You can order every day. And so people were ordering every day, and every order cost more than the gross margin of what was being ordered, is, you know, windshield time to gross margin ratio. And therefore, they're losing a fortune. So what do? You say, well, you know, keep a little more of this and, you know, order once a week. And that went into the contract.
So small orders are killers for a business, right?
In most cases, unless you can price it right.
Unless you can price it right. Yeah. We worked with a company once that could make money on a $50 order. It was astounding, but I've never seen anything like that since.
Well, Amazon can.
Okay.
And they can deliver it to Lexington, Massachusetts, you know, where I live, in 2 hours.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because they have groceries on the truck and they've got a critical mass that can support, you know, the gross margin on the truck is more than the cost of the truck. So you have to really kind of think about how the numbers work. But as a general rule, you have to go up market. And that also means that that means you need an enterprise profit management view that says, where are you making money? And where are you losing money? And where are you doing nothing but consuming resources? Now, the really, really important thing, the most important thing in the whole system, the question is, how do I make money in it? And most people will dive right into, where am I losing it? And I'm here to tell you that's the wrong thing to do. Okay? So make money by doubling your profit peaks. And if, say, 15% of your customers are profit peaks, and you double your business in a third of them, that's 5% of your customers. If you know who they are, it's not that hard, you know, then your profits go up by 60, 70%. It's really that simple. And then if you go to the drains and you start to put them in categories, this one orders too much, this one cherry picks, this one should have substitutes. There are some very easy fixes that you can, you know, wing on through your customer base. And then you got a bunch of people who just simply want to, you know, mud wrestle with you for the rest of their lives. And you say, well, you know, we're going to price it right. And, you know, they can either pay the cost or they're not going to pay the cost.
So I want to summarize this, Jonathan, if I could, because this is actually a different way of thinking about it than I've thought about it, and I love it. So you're saying, rather than start with the profit drains and try to reform them in some way, and you outline some of the ways they could be reformed, you're saying start with the high profit, high volume customers and do more business with them. Absolutely. And you do things like supply chain integration. So in the original Baxter BMI, vendor managed inventory, that we did, it was with Credit Valley Hospital in Mississauga, Ontario, just outside Toronto. We had 3 things that happened. First one was expected. The second one was a surprise. The third one blew us out of the water, frankly. Number one, the hospital costs went down by about 30% and service went up. And we've replicated this in, you know, in a number of major hospital systems, you know, for the systems. And we can, you know, we can typically get 60% savings at this point and increase the service level, you know, through
integrating the supplier and supplier. That's the first thing. The second thing that happened, which really surprised us, was that our costs went down by 30%. So what? How could that possibly be? Well, the answer was we now control the order pattern. So if you can imagine, when you go into a hospital, they give you a little, welcome kit with, a soap and toothbrush and washcloth and stuff. The soaps come in what's called a flat of the 100 bars of soap, maybe 50. Okay. We had hospitals that were counting every day, how many bars they used in each patient care area, and then ordering from the stock room. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, order 7 bars of soap. It costs, a minute piece of a penny.
Right.
So, give them another flat of soap. Order just these silly things that are never measured and never managed. So hospital costs went down by 30%. Now, what really floored us, and I think most people doing VMI don't see this. And yesterday I was mentioning to Jonathan, I taught in an executive program at MIT, and this was the heart of what I said. Our sales in the highest penetrated accounts in the country went up by 35 to 40%. Our sales in the highest penetrated accounts, highest penetrated per bed in the country, went up by 30 to 40%. That always happens. Supply chain integration drives more sales than sales does. And that was an astonishing thing. So here we had these profit peak customers, and we would start integrating our supply chain with them through a variety of measures, or it may be product, product category co-management, or it could be technical development. At one point, GE Plastics had hundreds of people in Ford co-designing the next generation of cars. So there are a variety of ways to get deeper and deeper. In fact, I wrote a Harvard Business Review article about that probably about a half a year ago. And it drives enormous sales increases. But if you do that with a profit drain customer who's not willing to give you more sales and not willing to lower the cost, you're going to lose your shirt. So what that meant was that we needed what we called a relationship hierarchy, where we said, okay, let's say there are 4 different kinds of relationships that we can offer: highly integrated, somewhat integrated, unit of measure to the doc, steady, standing order, occasional, and so on. Fill in the blanks for your own company. Excuse me. But the salesperson and the supply chain people, excuse me, Jonathan, need to do is to mix and match customers to relationships based on the margin available, the size, the operating fit, their willingness and ability to partner. And then you go and sell the relationship, and sale takes care of itself, and supply chain cost takes care of itself. And that's how you link these profit segments to business development. It's one thing to have a report that says you made this much money on this and that much money on that. It's something else to have a systematic roadmap to increase your profits. We, in the companies we work with, we're increasing profitability by 10 to 30% annually, sustainably. And it also ties into things like inflation pricing, which is a really big issue. So for example, if you're doing, you have inflation, most people want to do a general price increase. It's a wrong thing to do. For your profit peak customers, you can look to see whether they're, if you have, say, trans-Pacific freight rates increasing, then you can see whether they have products that are hit by that. If they're not, then you don't give them a price increase. You say, hey, you're a good customer, we're going to forego it, but let's do vendor managed inventory. Let's get closer and drive sales that way. If they do have, products that are hit by the, by the price increase, petroleum feedstocks, trans-Pacific freight rates, you kind of know the drill. Then you say, okay, well, is this going to last or is it not going to last? Freight rates don't last. Feedstocks, maybe, maybe not. You can look at the gas prices and figure out what's going on yourself. And then you sort of figure out how to play it. If you're dealing with the drain and they're not hit with the price increase, with the cost increase. You say, well, we can keep your costs here, but you got to lower your operating costs. That's the trade. And if they are hit and it's going to last, let's talk about how to change your pricing. And it also ties in, Jonathan, with the other major issue of our day, which is supply chain shortages. So you go back and you say, okay, profit peaks, we're going to give you, you're going to have first priority on everything. We're going to give you 100% of historical demand. We don't want you hoarding, if we can possibly do it. If not, we'll substitute and you'll be first in line. For your drains, you say, you're an important customer, but we're going to give you 60 to 70% of your historical demand. You can fill in your own numbers. These aren't magic numbers. But if you cooperate to lower your cost to serve, then we can give you 100% because you'll be a profit peak. How does that sound? So here you're using the shortage to upgrade the relationship. For your deserts, you simply, a few of them are development accounts, and you don't want to be silly about that. But for the most part, you would give them a lower percent. Now, just the most important piece of that is that if you do that, your service level will be 100%, because service is measured by whether you keep your promise. And you don't have to make the same promise to all customers. So if you promise 100% to your peaks, you give them 100%, you have 100%. You promise 70% to your drains, and you give them 70%, 100% of the time, you've got 100% service, and so on and so forth. So that was kind of my, a long-winded say of, telling of my rambling through profitability and the development of profit aisle. And, this is what I teach at MIT. I taught it yesterday in an executive program, and that's the way we do finance around Cambridge these days.
So it sounds like this approach of the 100% for the profit peaks, that's going to lock in those customers. And by treating them fairly, by not gouging or by not passing on price increase when it's not warranted, you're going to lock in those customers and the loyalty along with the integrated supply. For the profit drain, what have you seen in the ability to reform the relationship with profit drain customers?
That's a great question.
Let's actually talk about it like in the conversion, like what percent of the time is it successful that you say, hey, look, let's have a frank discussion about our relationship?
It depends on what you do, Jonathan.
Okay.
It depends on what you do. A number of years ago, I did a strategy for one of the really big financial services companies. I'm not going to name it, but pick the top 5 in the world was one of those. And I spent some time with their bank workout group, with their workout group for problem loans. And they had people who could go into a company, and all they did was fix problems. And it occurred to me that when, sorry, it's allergy season in Boston. When we have,
you're not unique in that, by the way. We got it here too.
Yeah. It makes me wish for the desert. Time to visit Phoenix. Anyway, so what you want to do is you want to have a tiger team of business accelerating people who all they do is go into peak customers and accelerate the business. A different team, all they do is go into drain customers and fix the problems, because in almost all cases, it's as costly for the customer as it is for you. If they're ordering every day, it costs them just as much as it costs you.
Yeah, this is definitely a good for the goose, good for the gander type
absolutely
of thing, right?
And so you want these tiger teams, and that's all they just like a bank workout group. Your problem customers, we fix you. So when you've got that, then you're sort of boiling it back to what percent of the customers are just mud wrestling with you and what percent are fixable. Old family recipe, 60% are fixable, 40% are not.
Interesting.
Okay. Based on experience.
And with the 40% that are not fixable, you just take tougher terms and live with the possibility that they may churn?
Yeah, you want to, I mean, you want to keep your toe in because sometimes, the management changes and so on and so forth. But basically you say no through pricing.
You say no through pricing. Got it. Okay.
And, you show them the numbers and you say, this is why we can't do it. What's interesting there, we did that with a number of companies. One was a furniture retailer. I know we have a lot of distributors here, but it works in distribution also. They had customers that were shopping, they'd come into the store where they had really good service. They'd pick out their mattress. It's where you make money in furnitures and mattresses. They go to Sleepy's or, mattresses on the internet and come back and say, well, you're selling for $2,200, I can get it for 18. And, they would collapse. And the answer should be, well, I guess you have to go to the internet. 9 out of 10 of those customers bought from the store anyway at the higher price because they like the service. If you buy from the internet, you don't get a trial period. Oh, really? When you buy a mattress from a reputable store, you've got 60 days or 90 days to see if it's comfortable. And, usually high service wins. Same thing with trucking companies. It was people are afraid to lose, to stand up for the business. And you say, we give better service. I'm sure you say the same thing. It's when I used to do consulting, I had a high rate. I'm sure you do too, Jonathan. People would say, well, I can get a lower rate somewhere else. And I'd say, well, good for you.
Yeah.
You're going to get something different. If that's, they're good too with what they do. If that's what you want, then, that's okay. There's plenty of fish in the sea.
So one of the things that Ian and I have worked on and discussed throughout this show is something we call the distributor relative value model. 2 dimensions to this: logistic complexity of the transaction or the relationship, value add complexity of the transaction or the relationship. So if you think about a company that's doing configuring a drive for automation, that's very high value add, right? And then you can think about more complex logistic things.
Right.
So when we look at the Amazons of the world, they fit into 0 or low value add and simple logistics. They are in the bottom left quadrant or corner of that framework, right?
Well, the value add from Amazon in many ways, there's 2 dimensions I'm thinking of. One is, do I go in and, configure your drive? No. But do I want to have 10,000 recommendations and Q&As and,
That's
they
right.
have an information rich environment.
They do.
So for certain easy to buy products, it's a good fit. For other products, and that sort of goes back to the idea that you want to move up market into your higher service, right? Because that way you've got more margin. Now the corollary is that higher service has higher cost.
That's right.
But it's a great investment. So if you don't know what the return on your higher investment is in that customer for that service, you can't look at the ROI. And so when you look on a transaction basis, you can actually figure out the ROI. It's very similar, Jonathan, to the issue of a loss leader, where, in an automotive retailer or distributor, fluids are the loss leader.
Okay.
You go and you buy oil and, they want you to buy a catalytic converter or something, and people say, well, they buy something else. It's, well, the answer is if you can look at every, what you want to do is look at a basket, what's in the basket, the catalytic converter, what's the gross margin of the basket? It turns out that in most cases where we've looked, 90% of the baskets are losing money. 10% are making a fortune. You send them a coupon. So I think it all comes back to being able to discriminate between where something fits and where it doesn't fit. And if it doesn't fit, then what fits there and what else can you do?
Well, yeah. So if we look at your 90-10 example, every distributor has a mix of complex transactions, logistically or value add, and simple transactions.
Yes.
So what you're saying is moving up market is being able to handle the complex transactions, but at the same time, using your ability to handle the complex transactions to protect the simple transactions, meaning that you still get those.
If it's in, well, if it's in the same customer.
Right.
They're different customers.
Right.
And all the simple one is doing is, bleeding resources. No. If I've got a really terrific customer, I want to get all the business, of course.
Let's talk a little bit about the desert. So the desert, or that plateau that you referenced in the opening slide, that's a set of smaller customers who are unprofitable or slightly profitable, right?
Well, it actually has, if you pull it apart, and again, I wrote a series of Harvard Business Review articles on the peaks, the desert, managing the peaks, managing the deserts, and managing the drains.
Right.
About a year ago or so. And you can get on the web if you're interested. For the deserts, if you really pull it apart, the way that we do it is that we look at quartiles. So we array the deserts by profitability from high to low. You just simply divide it into 4 buckets, top, upper, lower, bottom. And what you find is that the top quartile, they make a lot of money. But if you look on a per customer basis, let's say with the profit peak, they could be making, call it $40,000 per transaction. In a top quartile desert, they could be making $1,500. So you can go and send a team to work with your peak because there's a lot of margin there. But for the desert, you've got to do it somehow at arm's length. And
so
you got to
do a quartile for each of these 3 bins. Peak,
well, particularly
desert.
You can do it for each of the bins, but particularly where it's really important is for the deserts.
For the desert,
because
okay.
you have so many. You have say a company has 1,500 peaks and 1,200 drains and 15,000 deserts.
Right.
So you've got to deal with them differently. So your top quartile, I say 16,000, which would be 4,000, top 4,000. You're making call it $800 to $1,000 per customer. You can't go send a team. So you've got to figure out how to do that in kind of a more
because the volume doesn't justify it.
Doesn't justify it. There's not enough gross. It's the old salesman thing. It's gross margin to windshield time.
Yep.
Right. That's what it is. So you find a way to deal with that. For your bottom, you're losing a fortune. And there you've got to be really hard-nosed and say, you get a menu, you get this. You want to go off the menu, it's going to cost you. You want a napkin, it's going to cost you, and so on and so forth. And in the middle, they're not doing anything but consuming resources. So you do need to find out how much the resources cost, which are never, determined in an accounting system, to figure out how much the resources cost and charge them for it. For your top quartile, many of them are usually either development accounts or they're important potential customers that are giving you a little taste, or you're the tertiary supplier. And you can make a lot of money doing that if you price it right. So you've got to figure out how to deal with these, kind of different strategies to deal with them. But I wouldn't write them off. I wouldn't just give them a blanket price increase. That's one where you need to take it apart. Because if you do quartiles in your profit peaks, you could be making 40,000 in your top peak. You could be making 30, 20, and 15.
Mm-hmm.
And 15 is still a lot of money. So you want to be hands-on with all of them. Again, the theme that we're developing here together is the idea that it's one thing to have this information, and that's a big deal. It's a very big deal. It's very hard to do, frankly. It took us years to develop systems to do it, and we've got, a very big development team that does that. But the real payoff is translating into more money. And, it's both knowing what to do, roadmap, and it's change management to get people to do it. And if I were to say that's our specialty, their specialty. I mean, I've written many articles telling people how to match transactions, and there are other companies that do that. But we can take a company from knowledge, from information to results.
So we have a
that's
great,
really
we
value
have a
added.
great question on this point, Jonathan. And by the way, I should encourage our audience to ask questions. There's a Q&A button at the bottom. If that's not visible for some reason, you can toss it.
I have it on mine.
But the question is, Jonathan, what would you recommend as the single best book to read for a distributor on profitability? You don't have to be humble.
Do I have to be?
You don't have to be humble.
John Wass and I, John is the CEO of our company.
Mhm.
And he was former senior vice president of Staples. He grew it from 3 stores to 2,000. And he was a former student of mine, I would add, at Princeton and MIT. And he and I wrote a book recently called Choose Your Customer: How to Compete with the Digital Giants and Thrive. And, it's been selling very well. Oh, that's it. Thank you. I appreciate it. That's the book. I'm sorry I don't have one to show you. I'm not a marketing guy. So, I really sort of, we go through that piece by piece by piece, how to get the information, how to deal with customers, how to deal with products, how to deal with supply chains and the organization. I would say that would be what I'd recommend. I don't know of anybody else who's doing this kind of work. And God knows I get a lot of calls, because I have some visibility at MIT. Well, who else can I talk to? I don't know anybody else I know people who are developing this type of information. Often it's based on stuff that I wrote, probably 10 or 12 years ago for Harvard Business School's Working Knowledge, how to do transaction-based profitability. But to do it at scale and then to turn it into results, I don't know anybody else who's doing it. And we've had companies that have given us a bake-off with, one of the huge ERP systems. I know Epicor is a terrific system in there. I've been fortunate to have them sponsor me in other things I've done. And I'm very grateful. I've spoken at many of their events. But I don't know if we've had bake-offs with, SAP and, others of the huge ones. And, they do what they do wonderfully well, but they don't do what we do, which is really different.
So the blind spot for distributors, and you and I were talking about this in preparing for the show today, is what happens between the gross profit line and either the operating profit or EBITDA line, right? So distributors run on gross margin. But what it turns out is that the gross margin can be very misleading. You can have customers that are high gross margin. You can have segments that are high gross margin, but are low operating margin or EBITDA. And so what happens is gross margin ends up being fool's gold. And this is a really hard thing for distributors to hear. Gross margin is fool's gold because the variability of what happens between the gross profit line and the operating profit line is greater than the variability of what happens within the cost of goods sold.
That's exactly right. People will say, oh, sales cost, that's, 17% of our company. Supply chain costs, that's 20% of the revenues. It's trivial. You're not going to make that big a change. But if you look at it, it's a percent of, say, the 30% GM, it's big.
It's really big.
You add them all together. And for some customers, it brings them into super profitability. And for others, it brings them into terrible. And I mean, you're absolutely right, Jonathan. You hit the nail on the head.
So the key, and this is a little bit of a plug for what Jonathan's company does, is making sure you have a way to get the visibility of what happens between that gross profit line and that operating profit line, not just at a business or a branch, not even just at a customer, but at the transaction and ideally at the line item level.
That's right. So in some company, for example, we work with some beer distributors, and they want to know what's going on 4th of July in downtown Chicago and Cinco de Mayo in El Paso And they want to know what's going on with their on-premise business in the first week of school in Boulder, Colorado. Did I get that right, Jonathan?
Nailed it, brother.
And so you can do that, or, if this thing goes on sale, what does the basket look like? You can, once you have this data, you can do anything.
It's very powerful. I've worked with companies that have 20% EBITDA in distribution. I mean, those companies are rare, but it is possible to achieve those kind of returns once you start to get the visibility into what's happening.
Absolutely.
And then I think also building on this theme of choose your customer, you and I were talking in the preparation, turns out that certain segments of your business, as defined by an SIC or a NAICS or your own classification, are far more profitable than other segments. I remember we had access to this data for a PVF distributor, and they had contractor customers, mechanical contractors, and then they had industrial customers. The industrial customers were literally 5 times as profitable as the mechanical contractor customers.
Yeah.
So the differences in segments are radical in profitability.
Yes. And I mean, you could take it into any part of a business. I remember talking to a company that, you and I would both know very well. I'm not going to name them, but they were in, plumbing sorts of HVAC and plumbing supplies. Mm-hmm. You can guess who it is. And, I went out to one of their branches and, I said, how's it going? And the person said, I spend all my time doing bids that we don't get. I said, well, how do you know, who you're going to get? I don't know, just, this stuff comes in, I spend all my time bidding on it. With the right information, you can profile your profit peaks.
Right.
You can go hunt them down, and when they come in, you give them white glove service. When you get a drain, you put escalators in the contract. If they don't want the escalators, you don't do the contract. All revenues are not good. All costs are not bad.
Fantastic, Jonathan. I know this has been incredibly informative for our audience today. I think it looks like we've got another question here.
Sure.
So the question is, won't the best of VMI AI for profit peak customers control cost increases on affected products? So if you're using
Say it again,
AI,
Jonathan, I didn't get it.
Yeah, I'm not sure I got it. If you're using AI to do VMI for profit peak customers, won't that control cost increases on affected products?
Well, AI, I'm not sure what it means to use AI for VMI. I understand AI quite well. There were 2 important studies done on the business use of AI in the past 6 months. One was done by Boston Consulting Group and Sloan Management Review at MIT. Actually, one of our departments at Sloan. And they found that the top executives felt that less than 10% of top executives felt that they were getting value from their AI investments.
Okay, that's interesting.
Okay, and then the other one was done by Chief Executive Group, I'm a columnist, I wrote a monthly column for Chief Executive Group, and they found that the vast majority of CEOs felt that they didn't get good value from the data.
That could be an adoption curve phenomena, right? Meaning we're early in the adoption curve of AI.
Well, I think that there are 2 things. Number one, if you do, if all you're doing is using AI to maximize your revenues, and I know a number of companies that are out there doing it, and so does Jonathan, and all revenues are not high profit, you don't have a correlation between your revenue increase and your profit increase. So, and same thing with cost reduction. So you've got to do AI on your net. That's the first thing. The second thing is that there are 2 types of AI. One doesn't really involve humans. Is basically process automation. So we use AI extensively, for example, in cleaning data from a company, and we use machine learning and we see the patterns and the outliers and all the rest of it. We know how to do that, but when we were dealing with salespeople and we say, the machine is telling you what to offer to this customer. And, Jonathan knows equally as well as I that recommendation is actually a probability distribution because behavior is not deterministic. So, it turns out that most of the time the machine's right. However, the one time it's wrong is like, going to a restaurant and getting a meal where you get sick for a week. You never go to the restaurant again. So, when we do that, we would look at company best practice. Why are your profit peaks so good? And, here are 3 profit peaks. Take a look and use your own judgment. Call the sales rep and talk to them, and people can absorb that. So there's a human interaction that has to happen between it. Now, I guess the third of the two, sorry about that, we learn how to count better. But the third of the two is that your AI function for profit peak customers versus for profit drain customers versus for profit desert customers are completely different because they're so heterogeneous that if you mesh them all up together and you stick a machine learning on it looking for the pattern, you're going to get a plate of spaghetti.
Because you have thin data.
You have different, well, not only thin data, but you have different objectives.
Right.
In one, you're increasing revenues because profits increase. In another, you're decreasing revenues because it's costing you too much money. So you've got to disaggregate it. And in fact, the tripartite, the 3 profit segments, I don't want to get, give people a nosebleed from this, this is MIT talk. But when you look at the 3 segments, that's machine learning. Machine learning is anything that makes a function more effective. When you divide all the customers of a company into peaks, drains, and deserts, that's machine learning. Look it up in any textbook. And that turns out to be the most effective machine learning. It's comprehensible, it's easy to use, it makes sense to people, and it's effective. Do more of peaks, do less of drains or convert them, and make the desert cheaper. Period. Yeah, I get it.
Nice.
So I think that a lot, you wouldn't use AI on VMI in a profit drain that won't pay you for it. Would you use it for a profit peak? Probably, but that's probably pretty far down on the list because machine learning doesn't give you the human relationships to penetrate deeper. Would you use it on your profit deserts? Yeah. Yes. So you have to kind of discriminate.
So Jonathan, I want to kind of tie up here. So we've gone down this brilliant path. I asked you to describe your career, and we got into the thread that goes through your career, which is supply chain and profitability, and how you think about profitability and what distributors need to be doing today, not just for profitability, but for profitability in an extraordinary time, right? With this crazy supply chain stuff. It actually turns out, and I want to thank you, this has been amazing. I want to share a little bit about what we're presenting next week because it's right on topic. The next week, we actually are presenting a thing on AI. It's called 4 Use Cases for AI and Distribution. And it's with Benj Cohen.
I know Benj. I know his family.
You know his family, right?
But we all know them up in Pennsylvania. Yeah.
Terrific people. So we're going to be looking at where AI can be applied today and where there is return, significant return for AI. And hint, it's not just on the customer facing side. There's things on the internal facing part of the business where AI is providing extraordinary value. So that's going to be on Thursday, June 16th. Our normal cadence is to meet on Wednesdays. This will be on Thursday, June 16th, 12 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, 9 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time. And then 2 weeks from today, back to our Wednesday cadence, we have Wind Supply, an ownership team under every roof. Just absolutely fascinating story. I think about a unique model within distribution. There are different models. There are co-ops, there are buying groups, there are PE-backed things. This story is about how they've created a business with 600 entrepreneurs working for them.
Yeah, Monty's a great. I know Monty. He's a great guy. These are both absolutely A+ first rate. Incredibly valuable events. I really commend you, and I commend the people who get to listen.
Well, John,
and by the way,
Jonathan, it takes one to know one. That's what I would say. So you're A+ first rate. And if you want to reach Jonathan, it's JL Byrnes, BYRNES at MIT.edu. Jonathan, thank you so much. And we look forward to having you back here at some point in the future.
Thank you. I'd really love it. And are we off now, or still on?
We're still on. Okay.
Let me just say that, Jonathan, it's really a privilege to work with you. Not only because we're both Jonathan B's, but because you really have been one of the guiding lights in our industry for years and years, and still are. And you're always sort of breaking new ground and making the whole industry better. If I had to pick the top small number of people who really created the intellectual core of what we do in our business, you would be right there at the front.
It's incredibly flattering. It's the nicest thing anybody's said about me in my entire life.
Happens to be true.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Okay, well, thank you. And thank you very much to everybody listening in. It's really a privilege to get to spend some time talking to you.
Have a great day. All the best.
Thank you.